The stars shimmered like scattered diamonds across the velvet expanse of space, their light casting an ethereal glow over the desolate moon where Captain Marcus Hale found himself stranded. He had been part of a reconnaissance mission aboard the Eclipse, a sleek military vessel tasked with mapping uncharted territories on the edge of human-controlled space. The mission had gone smoothly, until it hadn't. A sudden ion storm engulfed the ship, sending its systems into chaos and forcing an emergency landing on this barren rock. Marcus stumbled out of the wreckage, his breath fogging in the thin atmosphere as he surveyed the damage. The once proud starship was now little more than twisted metal and sparking circuits, its crew either dead or incapacitated. His communicator crackled weakly at his side but offered no hope for immediate rescue. He was alone, surrounded by nothing but endless gray plains and jagged cliffs that seemed to stretch forever under the alien sky. For 2 days, or what felt like them, time blurred without sunlight, he scavenged supplies from the ruins of the Eclipse. Each step weighed heavily on him, not just because of the physical exhaustion but also the crushing isolation. The silence here was oppressive, broken only by the occasional howl of wind through crevices in the rocks. It gnawed at his resolve, whispering doubts about whether anyone would even find him before life support ran out. On the 3rd day, desperation drove him further from the crash site than he'd dared venture before. Hunger clawed at his stomach, and dehydration made every movement feel sluggish. As he scaled a ridge overlooking yet another valley of desolation, something caught his eye, a faint glimmer far off in the distance. At first, he thought it might be heat distortion playing tricks on his weary mind, but then it pulsed again, unmistakably artificial against the natural backdrop. Hope surged within him, though tempered by caution. Could it be another survivor? Or perhaps some automated beacon left behind by previous explorers? Whatever it was, it represented a chance, a lifeline amidst the void threatening to swallow him whole. Gathering the last dregs of strength, Marcus set off toward the mysterious signal, each step fueled by sheer determination. As he drew closer, the terrain began to change subtly. The harsh gray landscape softened, giving way to patches of iridescent moss-like growths that shimmered faintly underfoot. Strange crystalline formations jutted up sporadically, refracting the dim starlight into dazzling prisms. Despite the beauty, unease prickled at the back of his neck. This place felt alive, somehow, watching him with invisible eyes. Finally, after hours of trudging, he reached the source of the signal, a towering structure unlike anything he'd ever seen. Its architecture defied conventional geometry, spiraling upward in graceful arcs adorned with flowing patterns that shimmered like liquid silver. Entranced, Marcus approached cautiously, noting the intricate carvings along the base that depicted scenes of celestial beings engaged in rituals both serene and otherworldly. Before he could fully process what he was seeing, a low hum resonated from within the edifice, growing louder until it vibrated through his very bones. Suddenly, the massive doors parted silently, revealing a luminous interior bathed in soft, shifting hues. Without thinking, driven by instinct or perhaps fate itself, Marcus stepped inside. Inside, the air shimmered with an iridescent glow, pulsating softly like a living heartbeat. The walls were lined with translucent panels that refracted light into cascading rainbows, creating an illusion of infinite depth. Strange symbols floated mid-air, glowing faintly as if alive, tracing paths too complex for human comprehension. The floor beneath Marcus's boots rippled gently, responding to his weight with a subtle luminescence that spread outward in concentric rings. A sense of awe mingled with trepidation gripped him as he ventured deeper. Every step echoed unnaturally, reverberating through the chamber like whispers of ancient secrets. Ahead, a grand archway framed a scene so breathtaking it stole his breath away. Beyond lay a vast hall filled with beings whose forms defied earthly logic. Tall, lithe figures cloaked in garments that seemed woven from stardust, their skin shimmering with opalescent tones. Their eyes, large and luminous, held an intelligence far beyond anything Marcus had encountered. He realized belatedly that these creatures weren't merely gathered casually. They moved with purpose, converging toward a central dais where a figure stood apart, radiant and regal. She was unmistakably the focus of all attention, her presence commanding yet ethereal. Her gown flowed around her like liquid light, shifting colors with each graceful movement. Around her neck hung a pendant that pulsed gently, synchronized with the ambient hum filling the chamber. As Marcus watched, transfixed, one of the beings turned toward him, its gaze piercing yet curious. Panic surged through him. How had he not noticed sooner how conspicuous he must appear, clad in battered military fatigues amidst such splendor? But instead of hostility, the being inclined its head slightly, gesturing for him to approach. Against every instinct screaming caution, Marcus obeyed, drawn inexorably forward by forces he couldn't name. Reaching the edge of the gathering, he paused, overwhelmed by the surreal tableau before him. The ceremony unfolded with a solemnity that transcended language, conducted in melodic tones that resonated deep within his soul. It was then he understood, with startling clarity, that he had stumbled upon a wedding, an event of profound significance, binding two souls in a union sanctified by cosmic forces. And somehow, inexplicably, fate had chosen him to bear witness. The realization struck Marcus like a thunderclap, freezing him in place as the implications crashed over him. These beings, these ethereal entities who radiated power and grace, were not just conducting any wedding, they were uniting their princess with another. His heart pounded erratically, torn between admiration and dread. How could he possibly belong here? What right did he have to intrude upon such sacred proceedings? Yet, despite his turmoil, he couldn't look away. The princess stood poised and serene, her luminous eyes scanning the assembly with quiet authority. When her gaze finally landed on him, Marcus felt an inexplicable connection, as though threads of destiny had woven them together in ways he couldn't comprehend. Her expression shifted subtly, not with anger or disdain, but with a flicker of curiosity that mirrored his own. In that moment, whispers rippled through the crowd, a murmur of voices blending seamlessly into the ambient hum of the chamber. Marcus didn't understand their words, but he sensed their intent, their collective awareness turning toward him, weighing his presence. Some gazes were wary, others speculative, but none hostile. Still, the weight of their scrutiny pressed down on him, making his chest tighten and his palms slick with sweat. He clenched his fists at his sides, fighting the urge to flee, to retreat into the shadows where he might disappear unnoticed. But something held him rooted to the spot. Perhaps it was the hypnotic rhythm of the ceremony, which seemed to pulse in tandem with his racing heartbeat. Or maybe it was the undeniable magnetism of the princess herself, whose aura commanded respect even as it invited wonder. Whatever it was, Marcus found himself unable to move, unable to tear his eyes away from her. Then came the pivotal moment, a gesture so unexpected it shattered the fragile equilibrium holding him upright. One of the elders, draped in robes that shimmered like molten gold, raised a hand toward Marcus. The room fell silent, the air thick with anticipation. With deliberate slowness, the elder beckoned him closer, his voice resonating in tones both alien and strangely familiar. Though Marcus couldn't decipher the exact words, their meaning was clear. He was being summoned. Every fiber of his being screamed to resist, to remain hidden in the periphery where he belonged. Yet, compelled by forces beyond his control, he took a hesitant step forward. Then another. And another. Each stride felt like crossing an invisible threshold, leaving behind the remnants of his old self and stepping into a realm where rules no longer applied. The crowd parted for him, their luminous eyes following his progress with a mixture of fascination and uncertainty. When he finally reached the dais, standing mere feet from the princess, the enormity of his situation hit him full force. She regarded him steadily, her expression unreadable yet profoundly intimate, as if she saw straight through to his core. For the first time in his life, Marcus felt utterly exposed, not just physically, but emotionally, spiritually. It was terrifying, exhilarating, unbearable. The elder spoke again, his voice rising and falling in cadences that resonated deep within Marcus's chest. Though the language remained incomprehensible, the message was unmistakable. Marcus had been chosen. Somehow, impossibly, fate, or whatever divine machinations governed this alien world, had decreed that he would play a role in this sacred union. Not as a mere observer, but as an integral participant. Panic surged anew, hot and suffocating, threatening to overwhelm him. What could they possibly want from him? Why had they singled him out? Questions swirled chaotically in his mind, but before he could form a coherent thought, let alone protest, the princess extended her hand toward him. Her touch was feather-light, yet it sent shock waves coursing through his body, grounding him in ways he couldn't explain. In that instant, everything changed. The elder's voice rose again, weaving a tapestry of sound that seemed to bind Marcus to the moment, to the people surrounding him, and most profoundly, to the woman before him. The ceremony shifted, its focus narrowing until it centered entirely on him and the princess. Gasps rippled through the crowd, some awestruck, others uncertain, but none openly hostile. Marcus's heart thundered in his ears as realization dawned. He wasn't merely witnessing this union, he was becoming part of it. The princess's gaze never wavered, her luminous eyes locking onto his with an intensity that left no room for doubt. There was no fear in her expression, only a quiet certainty that transcended words. Whether by design or happenstance, Marcus had been thrust into a role he neither sought nor understood, yet one he couldn't escape. Bound by forces far greater than himself, he stood frozen, helpless to resist the tide sweeping him toward an unimaginable future. As the reality of his predicament settled over him, Marcus felt the weight of countless unspoken expectations pressing down. The alien princess before him radiated an aura of calm authority, yet there was an undercurrent of vulnerability in her luminous gaze that unsettled him. Her hand still rested lightly on his arm, a gesture that seemed both possessive and protective. Around them, the assembled beings murmured softly, their melodic voices weaving an intricate symphony that resonated deep within his soul. Despite the overwhelming beauty of the moment, panic clawed at the edges of Marcus's mind. He wanted to speak, to protest, to demand answers, but how could he when he didn't even understand their language? His throat tightened as he struggled to articulate his confusion, his lips forming sounds that came out as strangled gasps. The princess tilted her head slightly, studying him with an intensity that made him feel stripped bare. Was she searching for something in his expression? Did she see the turmoil raging within him? Her free hand rose gracefully, hovering near his face before settling gently on his cheek. The contact sent a jolt through him, grounding him in ways he couldn't comprehend. In that fleeting touch, he sensed a paradoxical blend of strength and fragility, as though she carried burdens far heavier than her ethereal form suggested. Her eyes softened, and for the first time, Marcus glimpsed a flicker of emotion that transcended species, compassion, perhaps, or understanding. Around them, the ceremony continued, its rhythm shifting subtly to accommodate this unforeseen development. The elder who had summoned Marcus now stepped forward, his golden robes shimmering like molten sunlight. His voice rose and fell in melodic cadences, each syllable resonating with a power that seemed to vibrate through Marcus's very bones. Though the words remained indecipherable, their intent was unmistakable. He was being formally integrated into the ritual, bound to the princess in ways that defied human comprehension. Marcus's chest constricted as the implications sank in. This wasn't just a marriage, it was a fusion of destinies, a joining of two souls across the chasm of worlds. His rational mind rebelled against the notion, screaming that this was impossible, absurd, insane. Yet, deep within him, a quieter voice whispered otherwise. It was a voice of surrender, urging him to trust in the unknown, to embrace the extraordinary path unfolding before him. The princess's grip on his arm tightened ever so slightly, drawing his attention back to her. Her lips parted, and though no sound emerged, Marcus felt her presence enveloping him, speaking directly to his spirit rather than his ears. It was a communication beyond words, a connection that transcended language and culture. Through it, he sensed her resolve, her unwavering commitment to the bond they were forging. She wasn't asking him to understand. Not yet, but to accept. Tears pricked at the corners of Marcus's eyes as the enormity of the moment overwhelmed him. He had always been a soldier, defined by duty and discipline, but this was something else entirely. It was surrender without defeat, submission without weakness. And though fear still coiled tightly in his gut, it was tempered now by a burgeoning sense of awe. Whatever lay ahead, he knew one thing with absolute certainty: his life would never be the same. The final moments of the ceremony passed in a blur of sensory overload for Marcus. The luminous beings surrounding him began to chant, their voices intertwining in harmonies that seemed to resonate with the very fabric of existence. The air grew warmer, charged with an energy that prickled against his skin like static electricity. Colors danced across the chamber, swirling around the dais in patterns too intricate to follow, yet somehow soothing in their complexity. At the center of it all stood Marcus and the princess, their hands clasped together as though tethered by invisible threads. The elder raised his arms high, and the crescendo of sound peaked, vibrating through Marcus's chest with a force that threatened to knock him off balance. But the princess steadied him, her grip firm yet gentle, anchoring him to the present moment. Her eyes locked onto his, wide and unblinking, as though willing him to stay grounded amidst the chaos. Then, with a final, resounding note, the chanting ceased. Silence fell over the chamber, heavy and expectant. Marcus's breath hitched as the elder stepped forward once more, placing a glowing artifact into the princess's free hand. It pulsed rhythmically, its light syncing with the beat of Marcus's heart. Without hesitation, she pressed it into his palm, closing his fingers around it. The warmth seeped into his skin, spreading through his veins like liquid fire, igniting something deep within him. For a brief, disorienting moment, Marcus felt untethered, as though his consciousness had been flung into the void between stars. Memories, not his own, flooded his mind, visions of celestial landscapes, ancient rituals, and faces both familiar and foreign. He saw glimpses of the princess's life, her struggles, her triumphs, her sacrifices. And then, abruptly, the torrent subsided, leaving him gasping for air, his knees buckling beneath him. Strong arms caught him before he could collapse, the princess's arms. Her touch was cool against his feverish skin, grounding him once more. When he looked up, her expression was inscrutable, yet there was a flicker of satisfaction in her gaze, as though she had anticipated this reaction. Around them, the crowd erupted into murmurs again, their tones hushed but animated, as though discussing something monumental. Marcus tried to speak, to ask what had just happened, but the words caught in his throat. Instead, he clutched the glowing artifact tighter, feeling its steady pulse against his palm. It was as if it had become a part of him, an extension of his very being. The realization sent a shiver down his spine. Whatever bond had been forged during the ceremony, it was irrevocable, and far more profound than he could have imagined. The princess guided him to stand upright, her movements fluid and deliberate. She turned to face the assembly, raising their joined hands high above their heads. A cheer rose from the crowd, echoing through the chamber like a tidal wave. The sound was alien yet strangely comforting, carrying undertones of celebration and reverence. Marcus felt a swell of pride mingled with bewilderment as the beings around him bowed low, their luminous eyes gleaming with respect, or perhaps gratitude. As the ceremony concluded, Marcus found himself ushered toward a smaller antechamber adjacent to the main hall. Here, the atmosphere shifted, becoming more intimate yet no less surreal. The walls shimmered with faint, pulsating lights, and the air carried a subtle fragrance that reminded him of blooming flowers on a summer night. The princess led him to a seat carved from what appeared to be living crystal, its surface smooth and cool beneath his fingertips. She knelt before him, her movements graceful and deliberate. For the first time since their encounter began, she spoke, not in the melodic tones of her people, but in halting, fragmented English. "You are mine now," she said, her voice soft but firm. The word sent a jolt through Marcus, stirring emotions he couldn't fully process. Possessiveness, devotion, responsibility, all of the above. "I don't," he started, his voice cracking under the strain of trying to articulate his thoughts. "I don't understand." Her gaze softened, and she placed a hand over his heart. "Time will teach you. Trust me." Trust. Such a simple word, yet laden with implications Marcus couldn't begin to unravel. He nodded slowly, unsure whether it was agreement or resignation that compelled him. Either way, the die had been cast. As the princess rose to her feet, offering him a small, enigmatic smile, Marcus felt the first stirrings of acceptance. Not complete, not unshakable, but enough to carry him forward into whatever lay ahead. Little did he know, the true challenges were only beginning. The days that followed were a whirlwind of adaptation, confusion, and discovery. Marcus found himself thrust into a world where every moment felt like stepping through a kaleidoscope, shifting, unpredictable, yet undeniably beautiful. The alien civilization welcomed him with cautious curiosity, their glowing eyes tracking his movements as if he were both an anomaly and a miracle. He was no longer just a human soldier. He was now the consort of their princess, bound to her by forces neither fully understood nor questioned. His new role came with expectations that stretched far beyond anything he had ever encountered in his military life. Rituals governed nearly every aspect of existence here, from the way meals were prepared to how conversations were conducted. Each gesture carried meaning, each silence held weight. At first, Marcus struggled to keep up, his clumsy attempts at mimicry earning amused smiles from those around him. But the princess was patient, guiding him gently when others might have dismissed him outright. She taught him their language, phrase by painstaking phrase, her melodic voice softening the sharp edges of frustration whenever he stumbled. Yet, despite her kindness, there were moments when Marcus felt utterly alone. His nights were restless, plagued by dreams that blurred the line between memory and prophecy. Visions of distant stars, ancient battles, and shadowy figures haunted him, leaving him drenched in sweat and gasping for air upon waking. During these moments, the princess would appear at his side without fail, her cool touch calming the storm within him. "You carry the echoes of our ancestors," she whispered one night, her words heavy with significance. "They speak to you because they see your strength." Her faith in him only deepened his unease. Strength? He didn't feel strong. If anything, he felt like a fragile thread woven into a tapestry too vast to comprehend. Yet, over time, something began to shift inside him. The initial panic gave way to determination, and the overwhelming strangeness of his surroundings transformed into a challenge he refused to shy away from. He started learning not just their customs but also their values, their reverence for balance, harmony, and interconnectedness. Slowly, Marcus began to see glimpses of himself in this alien world, finding pieces of who he was meant to become. But acceptance did not come easily. Whispers reached his ears, murmurs spoken behind crystalline doors or beneath the shimmering canopies of their sprawling gardens. Some among the court doubted his worthiness, questioning whether a mere human could truly stand beside their radiant leader. Others speculated about ulterior motives, wondering if his presence heralded some greater cosmic design, or perhaps disaster. These doubts gnawed at Marcus, feeding the lingering insecurities he tried so hard to suppress. One evening, during a gathering in the Grand Hall, tensions boiled over. A council member openly challenged the princess's decision, his voice cutting through the ambient hum of conversation like a blade. "He is an outsider," the elder declared, his golden robes glinting under the chamber's iridescent glow. "How can we trust him to uphold our traditions, to safeguard what we hold sacred?" The room fell silent, all eyes turning to Marcus. For a heartbeat, he froze, the weight of judgment pressing down on him once more. Then, drawing a steadying breath, he stepped forward. His voice trembled at first, but it grew stronger with each word. "I may not be one of you," he said, meeting the elder's gaze head-on. "But I am here now, and I will do everything in my power to honor your people, your culture, and your trust." The princess placed a hand on his shoulder, her touch grounding him. Her expression remained serene, though Marcus sensed the quiet pride radiating from her. When she spoke, her voice resonated with authority. "He is more than an outsider. He is part of us now. To question him is to question me, and the will of the cosmos itself." The elder bowed low, conceding defeat, and the tension in the room dissolved. It was a small victory, but it marked a turning point for Marcus. From that day forward, he approached his responsibilities with renewed resolve, determined to prove himself worthy, not just to the princess, but to everyone who looked to her for guidance. As weeks turned into months, Marcus began to uncover deeper truths about the bond forged during the wedding ceremony. The glowing artifact still pulsed steadily in his palm, its rhythm syncing with his heartbeat. Through it, he sensed fragments of the princess's emotions, her thoughts brushing against his consciousness like whispers on the wind. At times, it felt intrusive, almost overwhelming, but gradually, he learned to embrace the connection. It wasn't merely a tether. It was a bridge, linking two souls across the vast chasm of their differences. Through this bond, Marcus discovered aspects of the princess that few others saw. Beneath her regal exterior lay fears and doubts she rarely revealed, burdens she bore silently for the sake of her people. In turn, she became privy to his vulnerabilities, understanding the scars of war and loss that shaped him. Together, they formed a partnership built on mutual respect and shared sacrifice, a foundation far stronger than either had anticipated. Their union also brought unexpected challenges. Strange phenomena began to occur, subtle at first but growing increasingly pronounced. The skies above the palace shimmered with unnatural hues, and the crystalline structures seemed to hum with heightened energy. Elders whispered of celestial alignments, of forces awakened by the joining of human and alien bloodlines. Some believed it heralded prosperity, Others feared it signaled upheaval. Regardless of interpretation, one thing was clear: change was coming. Marcus and the princess faced these uncertainties side by side, navigating uncharted waters together. They consulted ancient texts, sought counsel from wise elders, and ventured into forgotten chambers buried deep within the palace. Along the way, Marcus uncovered secrets about his own origins, clues suggesting that his arrival on this moon might not have been entirely accidental. The pendant he wore, the one given to him during the ceremony, bore markings eerily similar to symbols etched into artifacts predating even the oldest records of this civilization. "You were always meant to find us," the princess said one night as they stood beneath a sky ablaze with shifting colors. Her hand rested on his chest, over the steady pulse of the artifact. "Perhaps not today, perhaps not tomorrow, but eventually. Fate has a way of aligning paths, even across galaxies." Her words filled him with a mixture of awe and dread. If fate had indeed brought them together, what did it demand in return? What sacrifices lay ahead? Before Marcus could dwell too long on such questions, a sudden tremor shook the ground beneath their feet. The air crackled with electricity, and a portal of light erupted before them, swirling with chaotic energy. From within emerged a figure cloaked in darkness, its form shifting and indistinct. The being exuded malevolence, its presence suffocating the very air around them. "Your union disrupts the balance," it intoned, its voice a cacophony of discordant notes. "You must undo what has been done, or face the consequences." The princess stepped protectively in front of Marcus, her stance resolute. "We will not yield to fear," she declared, her voice ringing with defiance. "Our bond is a gift, not a curse." The dark figure laughed, a sound that chilled Marcus to his core. "Then let us see if your conviction withstands the test." With that, the entity unleashed a torrent of shadowy tendrils, lashing out toward them. Marcus instinctively moved to shield the princess, but she grabbed his arm, pulling him back. "Together," she urged, her luminous eyes blazing with determination. "Only together can we prevail." Hand in hand, they faced the encroaching darkness, their combined strength igniting a brilliant light that pushed back against the shadows. The battle raged on, testing them in ways neither could have imagined. Yet, amidst the chaos, Marcus felt something extraordinary, a profound unity, as though their very essences had merged into one cohesive force. In that moment, he realized the truth. Their bond was not just a product of circumstance or destiny. It was a choice, a conscious decision to stand together, no matter the odds. United, they were unstoppable. And so, as the fight continued, Marcus embraced his new reality, knowing that whatever trials lay ahead, he would face them alongside the woman who would become his partner, his equal, and his love. The light from their joined hands grew blinding, pushing the darkness back inch by inch. The entity let out a deafening roar, its form flickering as if struggling to maintain cohesion. Marcus felt the weight of exhaustion pressing down on him, but the princess's grip anchored him, her strength flowing into him like an unbreakable current. "You are mine," she whispered fiercely, her voice cutting through the chaos. "And I am yours. This ends now." With one final surge of energy, they unleashed everything they had left, their combined will shattering the shadowy figure into fragments that dissolved into nothingness. The tremors ceased, and the portal collapsed, leaving behind only silence and the faint hum of the artifact in Marcus's palm. Breathing heavily, they sank to their knees, still clutching each other tightly. For a moment, neither spoke, the enormity of what they'd just faced settling over them like a heavy veil. Then, slowly, the princess raised her head, her luminous eyes meeting his with a mixture of relief and awe. "You saved us," she said softly, though there was no doubt in her tone that it had been a shared victory. Marcus shook his head, his voice hoarse but steady. "No. We saved each other." As they rose to their feet, the skies above began to clear, the unnatural hues fading into a tranquil glow. Around them, the palace seemed to sigh in relief, its crystalline structures humming softly once more. The bond between them felt stronger than ever, no longer just a connection but a living, breathing force. Hand in hand, they walked back toward the heart of the palace, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. They were no longer two separate beings. They were one, a union forged not by fate alone, but by choice, courage, and love. And for the first time since his arrival, Marcus knew without a shadow of a doubt that he belonged.